Welcome to the People, Property, Place podcast with me, your host, Matthew Watts, founder and managing director of Rockborn. This is a podcast where I share the stories, views, opinions and career journeys of the movers, shakers, innovators and leaders in the real estate industry. Welcome to the People, Property, Place podcast. Today we're joined by Andrew Ferguson, Executive Development Director at LCR Property. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matthew. Thank you.
Not at all. Well, a place I always like to start these podcasts is how you got into property. But as a man who's had a prior career before you got into property as a helicopter pilot with the RAF, can we just touch on that first? And can you just explain to me how you got into that?
Sure. Yes. I guess I thought, as many people do, some people join as an air cadet. Some people recognise it's something they've always wanted to do. I wasn't really that person. Through school, coming into university when the pressure was on, parents and friends, and you have to choose what you want to do with your life. At that stage, I think it was quite sort of, I had a next door neighbour at the time who said he was really keen to be a pilot, the likes of BA. And I remember I was speaking to my sort of parents and one of my parents' friends at the time, and I said, I'm keen to explore being a pilot, like my friend. And then that person said, I mean, for the Air Force or for BA? And I'd never thought or barely even knew the Air Force existed, being a young whippersnapper from Belfast at the time, even though we were flying over our heads day in, day out. So at that point, to sort of try to explore, that might be a cool thing to try and tell people in school I wanted to do. And from that, then that started the kind of process of rolling into how do I do it, what grades do I need, what I need to study, where can you do it, and what that route is. So that's how it started. And then into university, not really knowing, a bit of a lost soul, because a bit of me was thinking around the civil engineering side, and IT was becoming a thing. Lots of people talking about property, but it was kind of still, pre-noughties, so it was on a downward spiral. So really it was university days that I decided to pursue it, albeit it wasn't my first love, wasn't anything I wanted to be the whole time.
So you weren't a kid growing up with the Aerofix or Isofix or whatever they're called, models hanging from your bedroom ceiling and staring out of the window?
None of that. Didn't no. So it's not that I had that real innate interest, but it grew. And then I think people joke. I mean, it's quite timely with Top Gun 2 coming out. And that was really coming into the mix. I think that was like 86, the first one. So yeah, no, it was never really something I would like to have from a kid. I missed all the air cadet days and things like that. Didn't know much about the military, have no family history in military. That's all. So all very new for the Ferguson household.
And so how did the RAF, did they sponsor you through university, or did you kind of graduate and then decide to progress there?
So it was a university piece where while doing a degree, I applied and they said, give essentially a bursary. So I had a bursary for 3 of my years at university, which was a great thing to have. So not only was it some free money to kind of get you around and survive at university, but it was also knowing that actually this is what you were going to do. So part of that was joining the University Air Squadron, where at the same time as doing your degree, you also go and learn how to fly, and you do various summer camps and various pieces before you actually join. So you go through that piece. Difficult to get in, but it was just at a time, bit of luck, bit of judgment, bit of charm. And that really helped. So that gave me a real focus throughout university, because I had to get a degree in order to make sure I got in. Because you apply as an officer first, and then after that you get branched off. It just so happened I applied to be a pilot. So after aptitude tests, your brain works in a certain way, we'll take you on to do that.
And you fit the seat as well, right? Because so I guess the context here is, before people think that I'm a real geek, my father was actually a helicopter pilot in the Army Air Corps for his career, and my grandfather was in the tanks before moving into the Air Corps, and my dad's older brother, my uncle, was in the tanks before moving to the Army Air Corps. So I've got a long history of family in the Army Air Corps, and helicopters is something that I've kind of grown up with. So I've got certainly an interest in it, although I never wanted to go and be a pilot myself. But yeah, you've got to fit the seat as well, right? So it's not just about how strong technically and intellectually gifted you are. There's
everything. I mean, if I was saying, if I had a pound for the time everyone said, "Oh, I was going to go off and be an RAF pilot," I got right to the very end. At the very end, my eyesight let me down, my hearing let me down. But actually, it's the first thing that they do. First thing they do is they put you through a pretty intense, strict medical, where they do check your vision, do check your hearing, and yes, they do check the distances between your hips to your knees and your elbows to your shoulder. And actually, there's quite a small band that you've got to fit because it's all to do with the ejection seat. Because you don't get told you're going to go and fly helicopters. That comes through the screening process, post-officer training and post-flying training, etc., etc.
Fine. So they screen you and then they'll adjust you, depending on the aircraft or
Exactly.
capacity or what have you later down the line.
Mostly around need, what they need at the time. When I went through, it was kind of the early noughties. And that was just pre the Iraq War was kind of bubbling up a little bit. And the Eurofighter 2000, as it was called at times, with the Typhoon, which was what our intake was for, new jet coming on, one's moving out, we need more fast jet pilots. But just in that time period, everybody joined to be the fast jet pilot. That was late. So the instructors were having to go to the Middle East and various other countries to fill that backlog. So actually there was a gap there. So, and actually at our time, quite a lot, majority, to say the least, of people going through the training system with helicopters.
And so how did you feel getting assigned to a helicopter squadron or a training group? Were you excited about that at the time, or was it a bit of unknown?
Yeah, I think it was, you have this thing at the end of initial officer training, and it's say they take around 80 or 90 officers from different branches in the Air Force, and that's a 6 to 9 month process in itself. At the end of that is kind of like what they call, it's known as Fast Jet Friday. It's quite a really important day for all budding pilots to get to Fast Jet Friday. It's the Friday before you graduate, and it's kind of well timed at the end of every initial officer training squad. And I think there was around sort of 16 of us, and that's when the pilots get brought into a special room and you get told where you're going to be, what you're going to fly. And at that time, I think, as everyone will say, I was absolutely gutted because my dream sheet was to go fast jets first, multi-engine second, which is large, essentially airliners for the Air Force. And then third was helicopters, with thinking being that helicopters would be more fun to fly, but it's not what I joined for. And if I put them third, then they'll definitely put me fast jets first. Because I actually was quite successful at flying training. I was recommended to go fast jets. So you can imagine the disappointment. But when I looked around, I could see all my colleagues and chat beforehand, and who was going. I thought, look, it's not the worst thing. And actually, going through helicopter training was a real enlightening time, because it needs that hand-eye coordination. Your brain needs to work a certain way. So even though they are slower, you're lower. And it's a real leveler. And lots of people who were initially thought they were excellent at the early stage struggled. I managed to scrape through, as everybody does, training. So it's quite an intense sort of couple of years for young men and women to come out of university, be thrown into become officers pretty quickly, and then have to go through quite an intense ground school and pilot training.
And also, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't commit to a short service career, and a short service is 3 years. And if you're going to go down that route, you've got to commit for a minimum of 8 years, because they're going to spend £1 million per person in terms of all the costs, and they also want to reap a return. So you're signing up for quite a long time here as well.
That's right. You sign up, I think initially, if the Air Force, maybe slightly different in the Army, you sign up initially for 16 years. And then there's various option points throughout that time where you can come out from. But it's all kind of driven by, if you leave at that point, you don't get this pension later on. And you do get stuck in a bit of a pension trap, and that was kind of a lot of people have asked me over the years, and I'm sure you're going to ask me as well, why did you leave at that particular point? And that is to make sure actually that, you don't want to get stuck in that pension trap. Because if you are thinking of doing something different, if you do feel you've scratched that itch, and you do want to take your career in a different way, from going up the military ranks to, outside into what's called industry, where we sit now. Civvy Street, big bad civvy world, all that good stuff. And the grass is never been greener and all the stuff you hear, then it's better to do it early. So I always thought the Andrew Ferguson at, early 30s is better than leave now and get that time in industry, as opposed to Andrew Ferguson now in 40s. So my colleagues would have been leaving in the last 3 or 4 years, who stayed in for their 16, which became 18 years. And then they're out, typically mostly following a ex-military path. They are leaving because they're that bit further down the line. They need that bit more money. They need that bit more security. Whereas actually, 13 and a bit years ago, I was able to take that risk.
Yeah. So Prince Harry also, he moved into the Army Air Corps. And there's a bit of rivalry between the Army Air Corps and the RAF. Do you train together, or is it very separate?
No, you do. You train together. It's probably the only tri-service is helicopter training, which is amazing. So you start off in a group with RAF, Army and Navy. And then once you go through that initial training, you go off to various places. So the Air Force guys do stay at a place called RAF Shawbury, which has the next type of helicopter up. Army guys then go off to Middle Wallop, and then Navy guys go down to various places like Yolt and Culdrose, depending where they're going to fly. So the rivalry there is real. But it's in good form. It's in good humour. You've got different skill sets. I mean, I think, Army people typically, they have a shorter service, so they join first. They don't know they're going to get into the Army Air Corps. They have to want to join the Army to lead men and then apply thereafter.
Yeah.
Navy and Air Force, slightly different, where we join to, I went into the Air Force and I want to be a pilot.
Yeah.
So the Army have to go about it a more long-winded, different way. And of course, they use their aircraft and their kit for different things.
Yeah.
They tend to fly lower for more battlefield airspace, Air Force more transportation, higher jets, different helicopters. Navy more seafaring machines that kind of need to be, land on ships, etc., etc. So that's afterwards when you get into your conversion units of what type you're going to go on to, when you really get that differentiation. But you do see them around various courses and exercises throughout the bit, and you're friends for life.
And it's obviously a popular career choice, or it's an enviable role to go into. And then since Prince Harry joined the Air Corps and William doing what he was doing with helicopters as well, am I right in saying it became much more intensely competitive and many more people wanted to get involved with that?
Yeah, you could see it and feel it. I mean, I was in becoming or training to be or either an instructor at a time, and actually you do that at the same place. And I do remember, there was definitely a buzz even on social media was kind of coming into its own a bit, and you could kind of see, lots of nude cameras and large black vehicles around the place. And then I think the applications for that tripled. If I'm right, I think it was usually like about 25,000 applicants a year for 70 seats. I think that was nearly, approaching 100,000 at one point.
Wow.
Just for people to try and get in and follow that path. It was pretty much at a time, though, that the helicopter forces were pretty heavily deployed. So in that time, you would have expected to be around 6, maybe 7, sometimes 8 months away a year if you were unlucky with the roulement of pilot round. So rarely did you have any time to really go back and think about it or look at it, because you were in that deployment phase of your life with a lot of nights out of bed. So I'm sure you remember from having sort of family and parents.
Yeah, quite. I do regularly. And you touched on Middle Wallop. We lived there for a while. And I was actually born in Germany when my father was posted there, and spent a bit of time in Watcham, up in Ipswich. So yeah, have kind of trodden that path. From a skill set perspective, what would you say, reflecting back on your time with the Air Force, what are the kind of the core skills that you picked up that you've been able to transfer to your kind of second career in property? And then we can kind of come on to that part. Yeah,
sure. I mean, it was a daunting move, and I remember trying to put CVs together back at the time, and saying, you do want to talk about that. What's the main transferable skills, and how do I come in and say I'm going from being a pilot here into an industry, be it IT or finance or construction or development. How do you transfer it? And there's ways and means of doing it, but actually the main thing that actually has stood me in good stead is really discipline and not marching around, stomping around things. It's actually getting stuff, doing the basics well, making sure you're on time, making sure you've got everything all set up, make sure you're ready for things. Was always in, because when you first come out or start a new job, and everyone can align this to, if they've changed industries or even gone to a new job and it's a bit of a step up, you spend that first period of time, whatever that might be, you're consciously incompetent at that role, but you have to have enough about you, and you have to have enough to be able to get you to a certain point to kind of just stick in there to make sure that you are taking it forward and actually you are making an impact. So alongside the stuff that you'll expect me to say with good leadership and management skills that I've had the opportunity to really see and feel and touch in real life. And only then can you really recognize what bad is, so proper management of people, proper leadership of people, being the one who's happy to put their head above the parapet, and team building in around it, building of teams, etc. All that mixed in together, because, even though, yes, I was a pilot, I was also an officer first. And then as you became more experienced as an officer and started to go through the ranks, then actually you recognize the Air Force in itself, you're on a squadron. That is a mini business in itself. It needs staffed, it needs recruited, it needs seats filled, it needs programs, it needs everything that we do in a normal business operations here today. It's just there's not that much emphasis put on the financial side of it, because that's managed somewhere else.
Yep.
It's all about the mission. And the mission then is, of course, is to deliver for the UK. So there's lots of transferable, but the ones that I was able to kind of hang on to and grip onto, because it's, bringing a program from another part of MOD main building is transferable, but actually not what people want to see and hear in this industry per se. So I would say discipline in order to have impact.
And so you left the RAF in 2011. Did you have a transition into the civilian world? And what was going through your mind in terms of selecting a career, and how did you land on property?
Probably a couple of years before that, I was kind of getting that feeling, people talk about that gut feeling, that you always get, and it's true. When you're ready. You don't want to admit it to yourself, because quite often if you speak to a few colleagues internally, you're kind of thinking about leaving and doing this. Oh, that's risky. You've got the best job in the world and you're doing great at it. Why would you want to leave this? And you're like, I don't know. I need to work that bit out first. So finding out your why. And then, of course, it comes to what are you going to do? And that's when we get into your question of, well, do I go down, I'm not going to fly for a living.
Yeah.
Do I go IT? Do I go finance? Who's done that before? So a good 18 months beforehand, I was doing quite a bit of networking, asking ex-colleagues who maybe gone out. But actually there was, even though it's a well-trodden path, there weren't many of me out there.
Because the ex-colleagues go and fly commercial jets for BA, or they're private helicopter pilots, or they go and do
rigs or something like that.
Yeah, they do loads of stuff. Yeah. But you didn't want to keep doing that. You wanted a new challenge.
No. So those exactly needed a new challenge, and that was at that point in time where I thought I can take that risk and go out. And you have those conversations with my now wife and sort of say, if I leave, I think we could go for maybe a year without any of us being, she's a doctor of psychology. So, but for some reason, it's how you think, I can maybe, if I go out there, I might be able to go a year without that, and then we could do this. But actually, the uptake and the responsiveness from the market was really strong. So the reason why I fell into this, it was kind of my original degree with environmental geoscience was all groundworks and that sort of stuff. And I was interested in that side of things. But of course, I didn't use it for a long period of time. So coming back and saying, yes, I got a degree, I got ability to learn. But actually, one of the things that I was involved in was a squadron move. So when we were moving back from our squadron, which was 230 Squadron from Northern Ireland, to RAF Benson in Oxfordshire, part of that was a new hangar being built, an extension to that new squadron building. Part of the move around there was able to kind of understand that I could see that Carillion at the time were in doing this, and they were input stuff over there, and we were the end user. So I got an insight into what being the client would be, understanding that this part, the DIO is working for the MOD and there's some building going to go on, and how is that being procured, and actually the design's not quite right. How do we do this? How do the helicopters come around there? You want to be able to, so feeding into that was quite interesting of how the construction side of things worked. So when I started to ask some questions with those guys and sort of poke and prod and pull a few, I know some contacts in that area. Skanska at the time, large multinational, big global contractor, have a development side of the business. We're kind of saying they were on a bit of a look for talent. So they were looking for, commercial people from different industries. They wanted to bring some leadership into their business, and they were looking at, coming outside the industry, like M&S for commercial people. How does that fit in? Military for leadership. How do we bring that into the business? So they'd won quite a few contracts, and that was an opportunity for me to join Skanska at that time into there as a project manager, and then to go from there.
And so did you join with a view of having to do a real estate degree or an accreditation on the side, or did they just take your kind of raw capability and skill set, and it was kind of like on the job training that they chucked you into?
So they did a bit of a plan, and we talked about this before leaving and joining. It was, do I need to go and do a year in this to get my MCIOB or ICS? They're like, nope. Come in, and the plan will be for us to move you around this various part of the business. And as you work out what part of the business you're most aligned to, we'll do that over a 3, 4, 5 year period. We will then work out what you need with regards to chartership and pay for that. Of course, we can do that. And through that piece, to be fair, they did stand up to that and the opportunity, which is why I was able to stay there for quite a period of time. My CV based in there was able to get some time out on site, go and deliver on that. Then come back and look at the bidding, then look at how the regional structure is, and then look at the financing of it. So actually, there was lots of opportunity in that whole period to kind of go in and almost hold them to account. But of course, big companies like that, the initial agreement with various people, they move on, they change. So very quickly, you learn that actually it's about having your own brand. And very quickly, let's say within a year and a half, I decided to not try and be that ex-Air Force guy, because it was cool to have the ex-Air Force pilot in the business, but actually it was more important for me to go, well, look, I'm now starting to build my network, my trade, my branding of understanding this, how things are developed, how that development cycle works, how the construction cycle works, and almost not being that overgrown, overpaid air cadet.
Yeah, quite.
Business.
Yeah, because you've got, early 20s graduates coming through, probably doing a rotational program, and you're paid more than they are, and, come in with much more life experience.
Yeah.
And you're trying to define and create your own identity in the business with your own skill set and branch out and move away from that.
That's it. And you've got to work hard to do that, because quite often, again, there's a number of different businesses and large companies like that. Of course, you need them to make sure that they take a risk on you, especially when you're moving up and getting more senior roles in there. And it's important to them that they, of course, get the right person in. So you got to work hard at that. Dare I say harder. The learning curve is really vertical, because you're learning a whole new skill set.
I was going to say, it must be really steep. Because there's a lot of expectation, and you're probably is there an element of being frustrated because you come from an environment where you're really competent and you know it really well, and you're thrown into another environment where you've got a lot of the skills, but that learning curve is so steep and a lot of it is very foreign.
Yeah, there's a number of times, probably for a couple of years, sitting there wondering, why did I do this? What was the thing? When you get a bad day, when you get a bad week, when you get a bad month, and in our industry that happens a lot. Especially when projects aren't going well. I had quite a few projects ongoing. It was like program management from an early stage. And of course, I think what it is though is, so long as you were dealing with it, if you get to that point and if you're not dealing with something, then it just becomes a bigger problem further down the line. So I had no other choice but to deal with it there and then, or try and deal with it there and then. And then you had to use every single skill and iota in your body to try and pull the right people together to come up with an answer. So long as it was sensible, it was fine. At the same time, do the extra, the learning for your MSI would be if you're going to do RICS and various different courses on finance and contract and procurement and everything that fits in. So it was a good 3 years. It was almost like another degree while out delivering, while trying to put it all together. So that period was super, super busy, and it hasn't stopped.
And you're on the main contractor side, were you?
Yeah.
And your client were external parties. Because am I right in saying at that time there's a bit of a race to the bottom from a fee perspective as well, and quite a lot were going bust?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's into that piece of the client selection. Are they the right one? And large companies like that, large contractors like that, of course, they got to weigh up risk. And in the UK market specifically, because Skanska being a large, based in Sweden, but global, I think the UK marketplace was definitely the highest bid budget globally. And about 7% of the global market. So particularly in the UK, we're almost an anomaly of how much money we take to bid, specifically if you're going for large public sector contracts. So you can spend $1 million, $2 million more sometimes on a bid, and then come second or third. But of course, second best doesn't get any. So making sure they get the right client selection to do that, they need you to bid, because there's only a certain a few of large contractors who are left in this country who can actually take big large projects in. And they're starting to share them around a bit as well for large HS2 infrastructure projects, and then building is slightly different. But the margins are low and the risk is high, which is why companies, large contractors, like all of them really, have a different model. So you've got your 1%, 2%, 3% margin on construction, depends on how good or bad that is. And they'll always have a development side of the business, be it with UK office or commercial office, should I say, or residential, or another use, to try and get those larger margins so it's blended into something that the shareholders, it's palatable for the shareholders globally. So that was a more interesting space, actually.
So you started as a project manager, promoted to senior project manager, and then you became a development director. How did your role change, and how active were you in terms of curating that?
Very. So the project manager to senior project manager was more people and a bigger portfolio and a bigger budget to kind of pull in, and it was a mini P&L, which is really interesting, because the first time I was really having to see how rigorously people manage money, and actually seeing at that part how what's the terminology, not how tight you have to be with your fee, and how hard the market has to be pushed in order to keep the client happy and get what the bid said it was going to get. So the first move up was more people, large portfolio, a bit more responsibility. And then the second bit was moving more from kind of into the more regional space. So I was moved into our building business. And at the time, we were bidding for quite a few defence contracts, deciding to move out of healthcare, looking at a lot of schools were being built around certain parts of the country and looking to expand. So that piece was being able to move into the kind of superstructure piece away and move into larger sort of developments. Looking at how you would set up a region, making sure that it fits with the geography, fits with the people, fits with the client. Then out doing that networking, building that up. So in order for me to get from that more hard hat, muddy boots on the ground internal was a couple of years of understanding that bit, then bringing it into kind of more central business. So understanding how the bid works was what I wanted to do, because that's probably the most commercial part of any structure or any bid, leading a bid, understanding a bid is that teamwork, is, understanding the client, understanding what's being asked, getting the design right,
pricing it,
everything. So you get, as opposed to just, here's what you got, go and deliver that. I wanted to come more forward in the process to, okay, what does bidding and winning work look like?
It's like you're getting fed up with bidding managers, bidding and getting schemes that you're going, how the hell am I going to deliver this? This is, I've been thrown a pie. You kind of want to get ahead of the curve and make sure that the business is won and structured and it's effectively done up front. Sometimes
it's damage limitation. The second you purchase something or want something, it's a loss maker, right? And then flicking that into kind of development thinking. Some people, you'll buy the land at the wrong price, as we all know, or you'll buy the building at the wrong price or the wrong valuation cycle. And then you're into, an absolute pig before you even start the thing off. And when the margins are so low for those contractors, if you think they, do 5 jobs at 1% each, one bad job can wipe out 5 good jobs very, very quickly. So that risk management was really strong for my first 3 or 4 years in Civvy World. And then being able to bring that kind of mindset, move that forward in the process, say forward into the bid.
Yeah.
And as my career's moved on, I've moved forward and the more, development side, from the development side and front end side and speaking to the investors at the start. And I'm so glad it stood me in such good stead and the strategy of me being able to move into that front end has worked, because the rigor and the thinking that I bring a couple of stages earlier is probably not something that people I work with have seen before.
Right.
But yet it's so important, because if you're not buying something or doing it, it needs the best chance to get built.
Yeah.
Otherwise, lots of fee is burnt at the front end.
So what was the moment, or how did you get to that point in your career when you decided to leave Skanska? Because you left August 2021, the COVID pandemic and what have you is well and truly kind of with knowing that it's not going to be a two-week blip. What was the thought process and what rationale did you get to before wanting to kind of move?
Yeah, I had a great run in there. I loved it. My final job in there was a thing called Booklook, which means smart or simple living in Swedish, and that is a housing company that has a joint venture with Skanska and IKEA, and that was modular homes delivered. So that brought it into kind of the understanding the carbon neutrality of building in wood. I had the opportunity there to be one of the set up that business in the UK, which was kind of the main piece, and really understand the development side of things. We had some office developments, some commercial developments. Skanska at the time pulled out of commercial development. We're kind of looking to reinvigorate itself with bringing Booklook, which operates in Sweden, Finland, and I think Norway, bring that business into the UK. So doing that was able to kind of get me out into the land buying, set up the company structure on that leadership team, pretty much a blank canvas, setting something up from scratch. And at that time, after, I like to think, cutting my teeth, being on site, understanding contract, looking at development pieces, offices in London, Bristol, Birmingham, various other bits and bobs with a good experience. I was becoming more consciously more competent. Never the finished article, we never will be, but starting to understand how things work a bit more. And then that was a great experience, being able to help set that business up and play a big part in that, have a senior role in that piece. At that point in time, after we see some land being built, I kind of felt a bit sort of siloed with respect to, is it just houses and apartments? Because every time you go out as a house builder developer and you see and you look at a site, you kind of say, I don't want the whole thing. I just want to build that little bit in there.
Yeah.
And quite often either the whole site's for sale, or there might be a building next door that needs to be purchased, but we don't want to be buying that with an income. We want someone else to buy that. So actually you're almost a headache for the agent or the person selling the properties or the area that you'd like to build. So Skanska was, like any contractor developer, was very specific on its geographies, very specific. You couldn't step outside those lines for a good reason. So felt like I was getting a bit sort of siloed in, not expanding my kind of views, very sort of specific to apartments, houses, and everything else around it was just having to happen. So I thought there must be more to offer. I was able to get into something where I could look at the whole holistic approach of a development. And then started to talk about how that would be regenerated. So regeneration became quite interesting to me. So at that time, a few conversations and the LCR thing came around when I had a look at it and spoke to senior people because it was going to be a senior role, right? My sort of sell was, here's what I think I bring. Here's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in moving more forward or to the left to the more the investment.
Yep.
The investment for very early stage at that time where you do have, a blank canvas at the start. How do we get in? How do we get out? And everything that comes around that would provide a lot more learning again. So it was really difficult actually because it was in a really good place in Buccleuch and lots of good colleagues there, and I've been there from the start. And really
Modular's flying as well.
Modular's
right?
the biggest fad, still is, and it's more than that, and it's definitely got its place. And the business was, had everything going for it. So again, ask myself that question: why do I fail? But again, that gut feeling is strong. Just felt right. Did my due diligence on it, and actually, it was in a place where, I think it was. You're right, during COVID as well. But LCR was in a place where they were essentially growing with a 10-year business plan. So that sounded really exciting. It sounded like there was quite a bit of work to do, quite a bit of rejigging to do internally. And I thought, just come from that, feel confident about doing that. And there's some bits in there that they need to give to me, some learnings, which I'm getting. So I just thought it was too good an opportunity not to take on board.
So LCR is London and Continental Railways.
Yeah.
It's government business. Can you just give me a bit of an overview,
Sure.
or can you give people who don't know the business a bit of a top line overview of LCR Property?
Sure. Yeah. So LCR, they're around 35 years old, around that. So they essentially owned one shareholder, who's the DFT, which is Department for Transport, the government body, but they are a public corporation. A public corporation there are not many of them in the UK. There's quite a lot of them in the US, but essentially they're set up as an arm's length body. And they do get, so we can act like a private company. We have our own, pay taxes and have our own P&L and our own balance sheet. And like a private company would operate, but with a public sector shareholder. So,
because the ultimate beneficial owners, government.
Exactly. So, I mean, we can go and take debt, necessarily have to, but we can go and do that and have very, certain commercial leniencies and procurement leniencies as a public corporation than would say another one of our public sector colleagues. And it works quite well. And actually, what I've really noticed is being able to wear that public sector cap with the right people. It comes with a level of trust, especially when you're going speaking to local authorities, planning authorities up and down the country. It seems to be able to get you into rooms a lot quicker than you would do as any other contractor. So that's really useful. But having that fleet of foot that other larger organisations, public sector organisations would have. So I did a lot of consideration around what it would be like to go and work for that. And I think moving directly from a private sector organisation in the public sector, it was really hardcore public sector. I had struggled a bit, just my own mindset. But actually, this has been kind of true to form. We are able to be more fleet of foot and use those leniencies to our advantage in many ways. So
you joined as a regional director, partnerships and property in August 2021. Can you just give me a run through of what that looked like and some of the projects that you oversaw and team that you were developing as well?
Sure. So before I joined, there's a collaboration. So LCR ourselves, we had a lot of stock transfer from HS1 Drill Day. So we got a lot of buildings and property that we asset manage. I think it's around 300, 400 million pounds worth of stock. And then at the time, there was the sidings, there still is the sidings at Waterloo. So we've got some buildings we develop and manage.
Is that off the back of the CPO, buying stock or buying real estate with certain different parts to it to build the tracks, and then they're kind of left with parcels and bits and pieces
That's it. So there's lots of stuff that LCR has owned for the last one. I mean, King's Cross was the kind of catalyst piece. That was land transfer to LCR. They got Argent on board, Thunder on board, and then that's been a real kind of kickstart of that regeneration around transport hub experience that LCR kind of brought to the party. Other one, other large sites up in at Mayfield in Manchester to get involved in as well. So that's, south of Piccadilly, large brownfield sites, underutilized for the last 20, 30 years in Manchester. Now it's, the largest park in Europe. JB Land Securities, previously you and I, in order to deliver what's going to be an amazing scheme there. Stratford is another one. So quite a bit of land stock transfer has come with that business, and a lot of that's been either disposed of already or is being used, but still a little bit left. So the thinking around working with our colleagues, our sister company, if you like, and is Network Real, who have a very extensive land holding. And we talked about before, but being that public corporation. So there's with the collaborative with Network Real, they can sell their land or develop on it. But what LCR bring to that collaboration is the ability to land assemble by acquisition. We got resource that we can kind of get set up. We've got the skill set. So being able to go and bring the stakeholders together with local authorities, other bits of land up and down the country was kind of what they've been trying to do. So back to your question, then my job coming in first off as a regional director was to, okay, well, look, we think these regions here, we think that kind of works. This one needs grown. You've shown before that you can go in and grow a region, get things moving forward, build a team. We got this. Go and work that piece out. And as I say, post COVID with the Great Resignation, people moving around, and I was one of them, right? The opportunity was there, and the opportunity came through to kind of do a bit of restructuring in that region, put that together. I've always said, like, it's if you go into anything new, be it internally, I've always tried to make little bubbles of excellence and then onto the next little bubble of excellence and kind of keep delivering that way, because that's how you can have an impact. So I thought, if I can go and have an impact, what is that going to be? Well, it's going to get a bit of structure, a bit of rigor around that. So started to have a look at some, the basics of, programs and risk registers and then budgets, et cetera, et cetera. And then an opportunity came in once I got that bit sorted out. I was invited onto the exec board to look after the business nationally. So I've restructured that to make that fit. We've got around 50 plus live projects up and down the country.
Wow.
We've signed over nearly 45 MOUs with local authorities and other stakeholders.
What's an MOU?
So that's a memorandum of understanding. So that is it's a non-legally binding documentation to say we're going to come in and work like this, work together. And that's just building pipeline of others. So quite often when you look at a regeneration piece, it's quite fragmented. There'll be some third-party land, there might be some public sector land, it could be some Network Real land. So we might assess something as being an opportunity, start doing some work on it. So before we start spending time, energy, effort, and money, we need to make sure that actually the other parties are in.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that's just spending money at risk, and we don't get that bit back. So everything anywhere from Newquay to Manchester to Sheffield to Kent, we've got various sites up and down the country with other stakeholders and parties that we're talking to. And as I say, 50 something of those are live. Not all of them will come to fruition, certainly not the way we think they're going to come. So what we're now doing is just going through this process. And when you come and look at something holistically, you really get into the depths of it. Sitting on the exec board with nearly 30 it's about 30 people in the partnerships and property team, with offices in Manchester, Sheffield and London. So it's become busy on the management front, but my job is essentially to, lead, manage, inspire the people, but make sure I keep the business in good order, because that's the money we take in, turn it around and make sure it keeps it there. So like I mentioned before, with a bit of rigor around programs, a bit of rigor around budgets and how we finance it and managing risk, that keeps it in good.
Is this part of the government's levelling up agenda, identifying areas to put money into and rejuvenate, regenerate and bring?
So we will follow that closely, and the second round has been announced. So quite often we would be there alongside a group with some signatories in place, and in order to get some schemes, quite a substantial gap funding will be required. So in order to show what gap funding is required, we might be putting some time, energy, effort into looking at viability, maybe putting a scheme together, working out what the constraints might be for a site, working at senior level with those partners and helping them with their bid, but they got to go and lead it. They got to manage it because the money's going to go into them to kind of release it thereafter. So it's separate to that, but obviously we'll follow that closely. And we work closely with, Homes England and Network Real colleagues and other public sector colleagues who are out there, sometimes doing a similar thing, and just to make sure we're not man-marking each other.
And from an asset class perspective, does it incorporate everything across the spectrum? And how long are these projects typically run for?
So yes, it does. I mean, it all revolves around the place. Now, it just so happens if we're going to be developing in and around brownfield sites around transport hubs, it's mostly mixed use. So very few, if any, sort of logistical, industrial, more kind of mixed use, resi-led.
Yeah.
It's kind of the sort of the political hot potato, and we're targeted on housing delivery promotion. And that's kind of the model that LCR have adopted into kind of getting the volume of promotion through. So we're not necessarily out there going to be building it ourselves, financing and building it ourselves. It's really, as per government green book, recognizing or identifying the opportunity, land assembling as required, possibly taking it in for a pre-application, doing the consultation. You can take it to planning. Quite often, if you go to planning, you can take it too far. So getting a developer or a end user on board, they would have to go back in quite often, take it back to the start again. So lessons learned over the last few years, you can't take it too far before the market loses interest. It's not quite. So it's working out. That's what we talk about when we go through our pieces. It's not what's the opportunity are they in. It's how far do we need to take it? How much do we need to spend right now? What's our action going to be in order to do that? Let's think like the developer's going to think. And some schemes are 40 units and some are 2,500, 3,000. So there's a real mix of, and then those larger schemes, of course, everything's got to be brought up with a mix of, the infrastructure. How do we get that in? How do we get in and out? Those ones will probably take, 3-4 years plus, I would think. Whereas actually, if you got a business plan and need some money coming in and some money coming out, it's the smaller schemes that you can turn in 18 months to sort of 24 months are the ones, and there's quite a few of those. And they're as important because they have an impact. They have a public value as well, which is another large thing that we're driven by. So it's not just hard-earned cash. It really is around that public value. How can we deliver more of that is a really big push from a government perspective, UK PLC.
So LCR is normally, it would require the land. Might work quite closely with Network Rail, just in terms of expanding an area. It'll work the planning up to a particular point, but then it'll work with third-party equity and maybe operating partners to deliver or develop it out. And it's a bit more of an oversight and a reporting function. Yeah,
that's it. So it's essentially de-risking the opportunity for the private sector to come in and do various bits. And sometimes, if you're going to be, from an early stage, we have to look at the opportunity, think around what's best for place, what does the local authority need on there, what does the housing need there. Developers are likely to come here to the housing association. How do they think? Do we self-market test it? Where do they get the money from? Is it leveling up? Do we go out to the investment market and see what's coming? Do we do it ourselves? When we talk about de-risking, we wouldn't be doing our job well if we didn't kind of put ourselves in the mindset. So all our appraisals are all in the mindset of who's going to possibly purchase it from us. If it is going to be think it's more housing association one, we'll be able to look at how grants absorbed into this or is its developer, what size do they need to be, what's their turnover need to be, where are they going to get the cash from. So all those things come into as we go through our various governance steps. We take and that's what I kind of ask the guys, just the basics of that. Have they thought about the right thing? Are they going down the right line, or are we wasting a lot of time, energy and money? Or is this one so unknown? Do we bring back the spend, de-risk it with the local authority side of things, and say we're going to put something here, bring it to the market, say let the market speak, because quite often it's the best asset test. And I think that was one of my recommendations before. We need to get out to the market earlier, let the market speak, put that asset test in pretty quickly, because they'll do it. I did it a lot. My previous role, I was really interested in kind of getting in and if you had an opportunity to self-market test, I used to always ask to do a lot more work at that point. Because you get developers like, I don't want to bid, I want it off market, I want to do this, that, whatever. Well, actually, especially certainly the last year or two, getting things off market was almost nigh on impossible. Why would you?
How do you go about selecting a partner to work with? Is there a standardized process, or is it very much on a case-by-case basis, or is there preferential treatment for people who do repeat business and work across of the 50 schemes kind of working across a few at the same time?
Yeah, so we're looking at parceling some up together, so we can then say there's a portfolio of schemes here in your region that maybe a housing association is likely to move into a new area. They would be keen to do that. Those 50 odd schemes are national, so many developers don't have the same sort of national footprint. So the ones like we're down in Cornwall, for example, will be quite specific SME. So make sure that the 2 or 3 get them to soft market test what works here, what are your risks, what are your constraints, what have you seen before, and it might be supply chain. So if your build costs are up in that region or whatever, you can ask, why is it so much more down here than we're seeing in supply chain when you got to these one road in, one road out, more risky, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't, we've got some JVs and some partnerships that we can explore and bring in the conversation about how they would go about it. But typically, once they're in that element of delivery, we usually go to the market and make sure, see who else is out there, see who's doing. BTRs really hit the ground running over the last couple of years. And so understanding how that's funded, where it comes from, why are we seeing such a difference between owner occupier and BTR figures? It doesn't feel right. Let's go back out and ask the question to BTR operators for owner occupiers. It's around that kind of that capital structure.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you involved with a lot of the structuring of these deals?
We will understand how it's structured, and what the capital structure is, because we need to assess it, make sure it's right, make sure it feels right.
It's not too risky.
Not too risky.
It's going to default.
Exactly. Where's the money coming from? And like any capital structure, it's good for one time. And of course, if it's how long is that good for? So what happens after that 3 months? Is that capital structure still the right thing? And all the large kind of REITs and operators and funders right there looking for the raison d'etre, the most perfect capital structure that fits. And they will ask us, what sort of capital structure you're looking for. But actually, it evolves. Capital structure evolves with the business. The business will evolve depending on its debt to equity ratio, depending on how much it's got in there, depending on what it's delivering at the time, how those projects are going. So it's really one size fits no one. And that's why I'm still of the impression if we get it to the market at the right time, and of course, lots of people might say now, this particular time, with everything going on, is not the right time to take anything to the market. But, as people say, this too shall pass. We're not going to stop. And that's when the public sector can really come in and help keep delivery going by bringing schemes forward when lots of others aren't able to, when the market's a bit quieter.
How do you manage like inflationary pressures and costs from a development perspective, whether that is people, materials, timeframes getting pushed? How do you manage and de-risk that part of the development life cycle?
So we were to react and look at the kind of viability of all our, that's one thing I brought into the mix. So we've got in each region, we have viability champions. Because quite often if an appraisal we have or a number we have in our books or on our thing can be maybe 6 to 12 months old. And the market in the last 24 months just moved like it can move daily. So it's actually understanding where we are with something, because let's say a figure that you think was worth 12 to 18 months ago, you're out in that procurement piece. It might not, it would most definitely will not be that same number. And quite often some of these things are quite tight. By the time you bring in the constraints and difficulties working around transport hubs and the extra risk and contingency that developers need to add on, which I understand, alongside market risk and contingency has got to go on. There sometimes, is there enough in it for them? What can we do to kind of bring that back in? How can we defer things? How can we make it easier? So with no crystal ball or no silver bullet, all we can really do is react and make sure that we are absolutely on point where we think each and every scheme is. So as we know that if we are having conversations, if we are in kind of quite far down the line conversations, we can say we recognize that it's currently here. Not that we're saying we want you to chip the price, but we recognize what you're going through. How can we help do this? Can we bring any deferments in? Do we want to push it further down the line? So maybe some things we could be a bit less contractual on to help the market get away. Because look, we need it built. Quite often we're in there for an overage. We need it built. We need it disposed of. We need them to make a bit of money, as they all do.
Quite.
So it makes no sense for us to be going and be super duper hard-nosed commercial at a time like this.
And how much pressure are you under from the DFT?
To make money or to deliver or? Yeah,
to make money and also to deliver these projects on time. Is it the same way that you would have the same amount of pressure in a private organisation?
I think the difference is here. There's more of them. There's lots more going on. Whereas in a private organisation, yes, there'll be a number of projects, sometimes nationally, but everybody and everything is on them. Whereas actually there's 50 projects and probably another 40 in the pipeline. So it's kind of volume going through. So we look at how can we deliver public value. So some things might be, there's a conversation around, well, look, actually, there's been some levelling up. We're in with this stakeholder here. We've got some money in. We might not make a great margin on this. We might break even on this, but look, it's going to deliver X amount of million of public value. We should definitely do this project. That's almost a no-brainer for UK PLC, for lots of other benefits that public value give around jobs and, everything it does, environmental, social, commercial, etc., etc. So if it's a trade-off between not making any of that profit, but actually delivering public value, as long as we're not making a loss, then I think we can have that argument. Offset that with, we've got a good bank balance and a good balance sheet that gives us an opportunity to put some money in at risk. Now, it's that how much we put in at risk, the bit that I've come in and really understood, because I think we can do more. When I say we do more, quite often in government bodies particularly, there can be culture of just managing the process. And I think COVID hasn't helped people sitting behind their screens for a couple of years of managing the process, going through the governance, where actually proper development, real development is getting out and speaking to people, understanding the ground, having to think what needs to go there, not just looking on a map, really getting your feet on the ground and doing a lot more internally. So when you are going out to consultancies, you're saying, here's what I want you to do specifically. Here's the gap that we don't have. Can you fill that with data, resource, skill set, whatever you're asking for? So what I'm saying there is I think we're trying to change that culture a bit internally, doing a lot more ourselves, which is going to be good for us, right? Because we're in more control of what I call our forecasting reporting, keeping the business in good order.
Sure. For 2023 and 2024, as you look out across the market, what are you most excited about?
Yeah, I think, I said earlier on, I think this too shall pass. I think we're at I think it's probably as bad as it's going to get. I think there's still really good sentiment out there of people wanting to get out and do things, companies wanting to get out and do things. I believe the worst is behind us, and it's not just with interest rates and economic. I think people are going to be keen to get out and get involved and really start doing some things again. So I think I'll be really interested to see what happens around sort of the BTR space. I think that's a massively growing. I think I read an article, 17% of this country is kind of private rent, whereas other countries around Europe's, 50 plus, sometimes 60 plus. So I think that's a real area that can grow without that getting over absorbed too quickly. I'm really interested in how we bring in making a place, mixed use, we'd say, delivering that public value, making some really nice places out, just opposed to converting some, ex-commercial offices into resi. I'm really excited and scared and interested to see what's going to happen with that commercial office space. Lots of talk about conversions into what that's going to be. So in the next sort of 2023, 24 and beyond, that'll be kind of almost like I wouldn't say the tipping point, but it'll be really quite telling about how the next 5 to 10 years are going to be, outside beds and sheds, which is a bit of a throwaway comment. All the other uses around there. What are we going to do with them? How do we maximize value? How they work together? Where does it all knit? Is it all regeneration? Is it all resi? How is that going to change? And I think it's going to need some really interesting, tech, some really interesting brains are going to have to come in and help us with that, and some really strong leadership.
Are there any skills that that the RAF hasn't given you that you've had to develop in order to be successful in your second career, property?
It's a really good question. Great question. There's probably loads. Obviously the technical ones, so I had to come in and learn technically how things were constructed, destructed. Financial modelling, had to work really hard on that, get under the skin of that and take a genuine interest on that, the commerciality of things. But I think apart from that, as I say to all my colleagues and ex-colleagues who are kind of leaving, I think you're really well set up. You're really well set up with regards to just basics of interaction, learning how to stand up and give a brief, not present, discipline that comes with it. I think I'll probably be better placed to answer that question about 10 years' time, not to be honest with you, but it's like, I feel we've been really well set up. I think I'm glad I took that risk and left when I was sort of, early 30s, opposed to early 40s, mid 40s, because it has been an absolute, vertical learning curve. I've probably learned as much in this career than I did in my last one, probably seen as much as I did in my last one as well. It's been an amazing journey. But yeah, I think we're really well set up. So outside the technical stuff, we're well prepped.
What advice, I normally ask the question, what advice would you give people who are entering the real estate world now? But I'm going to flip the question in terms and say, what advice would you give someone who is unsure whether they should hire an ex-military individual and they're kind of weighing up the choice between maybe someone who's got a little bit more of a traditional property CV? What advice would you give someone who, is looking to make that call? Yeah.
What you shouldn't expect is one size fits all. So just because someone is an ex-military person doesn't mean you're going to get the exact same. You'll have been through an element of training, you'll have been through an element of life experience and skill sets Doesn't mean they're comfortable with it. Doesn't mean they're good at it. Doesn't mean they're bad at it. So what I'm saying is there's people been through there who have got life experience, who understand the importance of being part of a team, who understand the importance of mucking in. So what I say is one size fits nobody. So take your time and speak to them, but the skill sets that they have will be very much transferable. So you might need to work not harder, but in a different way. You just have to think a little bit differently about what that person needs to do. And I will bet that he or she makes a really, 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 really good go of it.
As we draw to an end of this conversation, Andrew, a question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, if I was to give you £500 million, who are the people, what property, and which place would you look to deploy that capital?
500 million is a lot of money. A lot of money, Matt. I think I would probably go for the larger and medium tier 1, tier 2s in that BTR suburban PRS space. I think it's a part of our market we need to move on from. Recognize that we're in a place now where and it's interesting, we're no longer in that owner occupier must own your own home space. Really start providing homes, making a place good homes that we can kind of get in and afford to kind of push through and keep working on that. So, naming no names because there's loads of them, but I would kind of stick to that kind of BTR suburban PRS market, and that would get sucked up very quickly.
Across the UK?
Yeah, I think, London's obviously the one where there's a big need for it, but others, Nottingham, Leeds, Sheffield, Derby. I'm looking at quite a few things in Derby at the moment, and market there is places where pre-COVID might not have been looked at before for this particular use. Now what we're seeing is there's, lots of demand for it. Lots of developments and developers popping up in places where you might not have seen them before. So yeah, across the UK, but if you ask me to put the money on it, thinking Sheffield, Leeds, 2 good areas where I think it's really in need. A lot of people want to be.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today and sharing a little bit about your background, route, views on the market, and what you and the team at LCR are doing. It's very encouraging to hear, and I'm excited to see what you guys go on to achieve.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to this episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague, subscribe, give us a rating, like or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of which guests you think we should get on the podcast or areas of the market that we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit experienced talent for real estate private equity firms, investment managers, REITs, property companies, and advisory firms across the investment, asset management, development, fund management, ESG, cap markets, investor relations, and general practice space. So if you're considering your career options at the moment or looking to attract top talent to come and work for you, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you can find a wealth of resource to aid your search. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.